So what you're saying is the fact that I'm so nervous, we're going to knock this out of the park.
Great episode. No pressure.
Best episode yet.
It's time for Sound Politics. It's sometimes good to just throw it in there just in case there's something.
Just in case that's the flow.
All right, is that anything? It's time for Sound Politics. This is Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Jeanie Lindsay.
And you're here in the flesh, Jeanie Lindsay. Like, I'm looking into your eyes.
We're making eye contact.
Yeah, it's weird.
Stop it.
You're not just you're normally, right, you join us from Olympia as a sort of an incorporeal voice in my head.
Do people know that? Are we like breaking the laws of radio magic right now?
I think
telling them I haven't been in the studio this whole time.
Because it does sound right. We hear you from your office, and you do sound like you're here. I guess we are. Yeah, we're breaking a cardinal rule. But you're here. I'm bringing it up because it's actually a sad reason for your first time in studio. It's going to be your last on the show, and your last because you're leaving KUOW.
Yep. Yeah, I am in my final days in my role as the Olympia correspondent, on my way out the door.
And so for your final time on Sound Politics, you're going scorched earth. You're going to dish.
Oh,
Today
God.
you're going to dish.
Oh, God,
no. I'm kidding. Obviously, as reporters, like the hallmark, I think, of a good journalist is you don't want to be the story. But I do want to pull back the curtain some today and talk about the press corps who cover Washington's government, where the press corps is today, some of the pressures it faces from the left and the right of our politics and our political institutions. And it is particularly surfaced by this little bit of drama that unfolded this session that you have not talked about yet. And I think it'd be worthwhile to talk about today. The drama is over, who gets press access to cover the lawmakers and the lawmaking. And it's part of this national conversation, right? Recently in D.C., the Associated Press was blocked from covering the president because they wouldn't refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, and they sued, and a federal judge reinstated their access. But it is not just Trump or the right wing. You and the press corps in Olympia face some intense pressures from the Democrats running Olympia. So let's set the scene by talking about a different White House. A White House in Olympia. Jeanie, tell us about Olympia's White House.
So, R.I.P. to the White House. There used to be two press houses on the Capitol campus. There was the Blue House and the White House. And this is essentially where the press corps had been shacked up for years, for decades. Yeah. And I actually was first, and the only time I was in the White House was when I was an intern in college in, I think, 2017 was when I was there interning with Austin Jenkins and Tom Bonsi. These
are public radio reporters who used to, Austin's been on the show.
Yeah. So I was there for a stint as a college student, and, I just remember it being, full of these rooms that were sort of like ghost towns. Yeah. I remember taking calls in an empty room because I was too nervous to have a phone call with the adults in the room. So
and it was not always like that, right? Like Paul Query, who is a friend of the show, has been on, writes the Washington Observer. He first came to the White House 25 years ago and called it, quote, packed to the rafters with reporters. He said about 25, not counting interns. There was a study from UW School of Communications that said there was something like 19. So somewhere in there, that doesn't count, again, interns or sometimes like people who would just come seasonally to cover the legislature. But the reason we're talking about this is the White House and the Blue House were torn down. And now the very small, maybe less than 8 reporters in the press corps are tucked into a small office inside the legislative building. What do we call it? The press cave, I think is what you called it.
Sometimes
it's like a closet.
Yeah, I jokingly call it a press cave. It's just like a little hallway with offices off of it, but most of the offices don't have windows.
It's like right down the hall from the gift shop.
Yeah.
So, the press corps is shrinking. There will be someone taking your seat. It's not like you leave and then no one replaces you, or at least KUOW plans to hire someone from what I understand right now.
Which is great.
Yes, absolutely. But I just want to set the stakes here. Why should people care about the size and makeup of the press corps in Olympia? Why should people care about the White House or the press cave and how many people are in it?
Yeah, I mean, we are incredibly outnumbered in Olympia. There are, more than 100 lawmakers to, half a dozen reporters
Yeah.
now. And the things that happen in Olympia, it's not just, politics and messaging. Like, these are the laws
Yeah,
that
I know.
determine life in Washington State. Like, if you live in the state or interact with it in any way, Olympia is where those decisions are made about how that works. And so as there are fewer people, or the group of people changes, I just think that it's really important to keep an awareness of that, to maybe hopefully reverse the trends that we've seen, because there's so much that happens there, and we're human beings, and so it's not like we can cover every single thing. And the fewer folks there are to sort of carry that load, the fewer things get told in the middle of the process as they're being developed. And I just think that it's a critical thing for access and transparency, and even just awareness of like what your government is doing, for better or for worse.
It seems like a typical day for you has often been a bunch of new bills are getting introduced. You pick one, maybe, or two and write about it. There's just no time to write about everything that they're doing and all of the potential impacts as they're considering legislation, which often means the public doesn't know about it either before it becomes law. And we've had like Melissa Santos complaining about budgets getting introduced, right?
Oh my
like
gosh.
mere days
The budget process
or
is a nightmare.
hours. Yeah. What I wanted to talk about today, at the same time that local media is shrinking, new media is jumping into the gap. Digital media. You can see this on the national level, where the Trump administration has invited in, podcasters, digital media, not always right-wing, but mostly, sometimes giving them preference over legacy media. And here in Olympia, sometimes new media orgs will hire like newspaper veterans, like Jerry Cornfield, who we had on a few weeks ago. He was the Everett Herald State House reporter when they had one. Now he works for the nonprofit news site, the Washington State Standard. That's new media, but the style is very old media, very nonpartisan. There's a lot of new media that is super openly partisan, and you and Jerry had an experience with them in the middle of the session this year that kind of is the little drama that I wanted to talk about. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so Jerry and I are, the vice president. He's the president of the Capitol Correspondents Association. I'm the vice president in our roles as State House reporters. And so this group essentially has been responsible for vetting, requests for legislative press credentials for decades. Mm-hmm. And essentially, you have to be a reporter that works for a news organization and not advocate for particular positions, things like that, in order to get this hard plastic legislative press pass that gets you access into the wings of each of the chambers. And so in the middle of this year's legislative session, we had political commentator Brandy Cruz reach out and request one of those credentials. And we essentially told her that she wouldn't qualify for a credential based off of our guidelines and our rules.
And Brandy Cruz is a podcaster who does not describe, she says she's not a journalist.
Yeah. And she will, advocate for certain conservative campaigns and causes. I think she helped, out with Dave Reichert's campaign, the Republican
for the initiative.
candidate. Yeah, the initiatives with Let's Go Washington and Brian Haywood. So essentially we said, through the Capitol Correspondents Association, you wouldn't qualify, but if you want to ask for other, folks to give you access, because the caucus leaders can, let whoever they want into the wings.
Right.
And so we just said, for a press pass, no.
And just to be clear, I don't even have like a hard press credential. When I go down, I get a day pass, and that can get me into the wings of the House and the Senate, like you described. That's kind of the place where the lawmakers hang out when they're not sitting on the floor to do the votes. It is like a very important place to overhear important conversations, things like that. And, the Seattle Times editorial board, they have gotten day passes to go onto those like that area. So you guys did deny, Brandy Cruz access through a press credential.
Yeah, for the hard plastic passes
Right, okay.
that are for those of us who are there every week.
A day pass, maybe she might have. She didn't ask about that.
Yeah, but that wasn't really the conversation that she was having with us. It was really this request for this one thing that is historically reserved for reporters who are, it makes our jobs a little bit easier to get in and out of those spaces while we're trying to do this work that we're doing every single day, every single week during the session. And so after we told her no, we later received, a couple weeks later, a letter from an attorney essentially saying that if we didn't give, her this plastic legislative press pass, along with another conservative media person, Jonathan Cho, and then a couple of other folks, that they were potentially going to sue us over it based off of the First Amendment. And that was really scary.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't, I should say, like, you don't have backup from KUOW, the Seattle Times, like any media organizations on this. You're kind of going this alone. So then you go to the Democrats who run the chamber, the House and Senate leadership, and say, look, guys, you have to take on this. So, like, why did you go to them and say, now you guys are going to be the ones deciding who gets press credentials?
I mean, when we were given this letter, it was the first time that we had heard about Jonathan Cho wanting a press pass.
Jonathan Cho, by the way, he's like a Twitter X guy. He works for the Discovery Institute, which is a advocacy organization, not a news organization.
Yeah, and it was the first time that his name had even come up in this conversation. What was the letter with the litigation threat, basically. We hadn't heard from him previously, as far as I know. And so when all of this was going down, we as a press corps, with no support from attorneys or really knowledge of how to weather this sort of storm or like navigate this legal threat. I mean, we're reporters making reporter money, trying to do a job in the most intense part of the year for us.
Right, yeah.
We essentially had our backs against the wall and didn't see a path forward. And so we just took a full step back because we have jobs to do. We had things to get done, and we didn't have the resources to navigate this really intense threat, and we didn't know how far it was going to go.
But you went to, the Democrats because they run the House and Senate, they're the leadership there, and said, now it's up to you to decide.
Yeah, we essentially said,
process.
These are your chambers, so, you have way more resources than we do to navigate this, so y'all can deal with it. Because, again, we didn't know how far this was going to go. And ultimately, any power that the press corps has around credentialing is still, the final say rests with the legislature.
Yeah,
so,
which is run by the Democrats.
Exactly.
We can talk about how the Democrats reacted to that in a moment, but I do want to say that, like, even though I don't necessarily think like Jonathan Cho, who we mentioned, or Brandy Cruz, and I think she would agree with me on this, are journalists, it still does make me really uncomfortable to have lawmakers deciding whether or not they're journalists. And what happened after that was that Jonathan Cho got blocked from a press conference. And that does make me really uncomfortable. And I assume you would agree with that, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, it's far from ideal to have the legislature sort of picking and choosing who gets access and who doesn't.
Yeah.
I think that if there's a transparent and fair process, it becomes a little less scary or, maybe a little less relevant about like who's holding the keys as long as there's that transparency and fairness to it. But we got into a situation where they kept him out, and then they changed, the location of that press conference later on, and in order to not really run into that same conflict, and he didn't show up at the later times. But
so hypothetically, they relented.
Essentially, yeah, but it was after they prevented him from going in there. So certainly a lot of concerns and far from ideal, I think.
So you're getting lawsuit threats from right-wing media, and then at the same time, you give up the credentialing process to the Democrats, and the Democrats are really upset about that. How did they respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, nobody was happy with us. I mean, they didn't want
Wow,
this.
that sounds like every day as a reporter, but
Right. I mean, they weren't happy about it. And so, we got mocked by a pretty powerful lawmaker who said that they were disappointed with us for this decision. We had folks like saying, are you sure you want to do this? Like, is this really the decision? And, I think that it was really the only decision that we feel like we had at that point together as a group. And I think that's the thing, too, is like this wasn't just me or Jerry making this call. Like we were all trying to figure out what was best. But it was, again, far from ideal and upset a lot of people. And I don't think everybody agrees with the decision we made, which fair. In retrospect, I probably would have changed different things about how I went about all of this, but this is the reality that we're in. And there are really big questions that need to be answered. And I'm just hopeful that this whole situation prompts, again, a more transparent and fair process moving forward that people are invested in and can work to sustain together to ensure that the press and the public, which is the bottom line here, has access to what their government is up to.
What do you see as the long-term impacts of this decision to change, who controls press access at the Capitol?
I mean, hopefully it changes again, right? Like, yeah. I hope that the situation we sort of left it in, there's still work that needs to be done. My sense is that the press corps is going to try to revisit this and work with leadership in the legislature to reshape this process and sort of revamp it, if you will. So I'm hopeful that the long-term effect is a better process that is more fair and open and accessible to people. If it stays the way it is, that scares me.
I want to get a read on what the relationship is like as you head out, as you say sayonara to Olympia. The relationship between reporters and lawmakers in Olympia, I think it's always a strange one, especially in this day and age where a reporter like you or I will shine a critical light on a Democrat's conduct or a proposal, and they will point across the aisle and say, well, look at what the Republicans are doing here or in D.C. or what have you. And I'm thinking about this a lot right now because of a lot of the press, continuing press coverage around the book Original Sin, which was, about the alleged cover-up that Democrats did of Joe Biden's
that's
declining.
Fascinating. Yeah,
I know. I don't really usually like Beltway intrigue stuff like that, but I've been a little addicted to that stuff, which I'm not proud to say. But I think about that right now a lot because every time reporters asked about President Biden's health, there was this crowd of Democrats who just argued it was all a distraction, and they would say things like, "Well, look, the right wing is sharing cheap fakes." I remember that word being used a lot. Like Biden looks like he's wandering off stage, but he actually is walking to someone. They just deceptively edited it. I bring that up because it's a charged environment in which to report the facts without fear or favor, as we love to say. When we're feeling,
we do love to say that.
we do. We're known to say that. But so I don't know. It's what I'm just wondering. Like, is this drama in any way similar to what's going on in D.C.? And I guess, has it broken trust between lawmakers and reporters? What is the relationship like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there maybe is a sense of trust that has sort of been eroded a little bit. But I think that by and large, breaking of trust, I think, is maybe bigger than this sort of situation. If you're a reporter who's consistently doing fair, balanced work, even if it is critical, I think people respect that. But I think that for some people, it certainly raised some caution flags and, maybe makes things a bit more uncomfortable because it's a reminder that, like, the members of the press who cover the legislature are not friends with lawmakers. We are friendly, but we are not their pals. We are there to tell the public about what their government is doing for them. And so I think that it's just a reminder of, like, that distance that you have to have, even if you're having, amicable, friendly conversations with people. It all boils down to, like, you're there to do a job, not to, like, cozy up to people that you're covering.
Yeah. I'm glad, even though, we talked a lot back and forth about whether or not to discuss this in your final exit interview, podcast episode. I think it's so important because it shows the growing pressures from both sides of the political spectrum on the nonpartisan press. And I think really highlights, not to be like too self-aggrandizing or self-promotional or whatever, but the importance of having a press that isn't partisan, that is going to call out lawmakers when they, are, lying or stretching the truth, even if they bring you into their office and mock you or treat you poorly, no matter how that lawmaker treated you, you still covered the Democrats fairly, I think. And I think that's just so important in this day and age. And that's why we're gonna miss you so much.
Well, and the last thing that I kind of want to say on this is just that, as we've seen the press corps in Olympia diminish, it's not that the hunger for information about the government has gone away.
Yeah, that's so true.
People still want to know what is going on and how their tax dollars are being used.
Yeah.
And so if you do not have a fair, fact-based, balanced press in Olympia, there will be people who fill the gap. And the people who fill the gap might not be the people who used to be filling that gap in the same way. So I just think it's a reminder of the importance of State House reporting, because the value that it provides people, even if sometimes it's kind of boring, it's the source material for, so many conversations and so many important discussions about how we function together as a society. So I just, not to get too philosophical about it or anything, but to me, this has just been a reminder of if you care about something, you can't just have that feeling and then trust that it's going to maintain itself. You have to act.
So let me ask then, as a soon-to-be member of the public who is not a reporter, what can people do? What are you going to do to continue to care about State House reporting? Because you're right, most people don't pay much attention to it until it affects their lives in the way of oh my God, I can get a higher criminal penalty for texting and driving, right? Because a state law changed. Or my gas tax went up. Well, I don't know why I'm just talking about road stuff. Tenant laws. My rent can't be raised a certain amount. Or, maybe my landlord is raising my rent more because of a state law that they think isn't fair, things like that. Most people don't pay attention to state laws until they affect their personal lives. How can you do what you just said to do? How can someone do that? Care more about State House reporting.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think that, people who listen to this podcast are already caring in the sense of
you're already doing it.
Supporting your local NPR station. No, but seriously. But in addition to that, I think that it's being informed, reading the State House coverage and talking to your neighbors and your community about it, engaging with it in some way, reaching out to a reporter and saying, hey, I've seen you reporting about this. Oh. I've got more questions for you. Can you do this? Because every time I received something like that as a reporter, that was a motivator.
Wow. Okay.
That helped shape my reporting. So I think that it's just engaging with the reporting and the reporters. We are human beings also. Support your news publications. And then, if you are a person in a position of power, making sure that the reporters who are doing this have the structures and supports to do it well and weather some of these, new storms and new dynamics that are here. So I just think that it depends on where you are. There's a lot of different ways about it. But for me, it's consuming news in a way where I understand that this is a single perspective. Each story that I read, this is one person's writing about it. And if I feel some type of way, talk about it more, ask more questions, read more, reach out to that reporter. I just think that it's a matter of like staying engaged and involved and not just looking away and trusting things are going to stay the same or be good.
So the call to action is email us with your questions at soundpolitics@KUOW.org. No, but one final thing. I want to end on a light note. What are you going to miss about Olympia? You're moving out of Olympia. What will you think about fondly, remember fondly?
I mean, Olympia is just a cool place. The legislature and the Capitol building is its own little world. It is a very beautiful Capitol. So for anybody who's not been there, definitely go walk around. It's awesome.
Yeah.
The people who take care of that building and the grounds, shouts out to them because it looks cool. And there's mountain views. So it's just a beautiful place to work.
When the cherry blossoms in front of the legislative building, oh my God.
Yeah, during cherry blossom season, if you're annoyed by the crowds in the quad at UW, go to Olympia if you can.
So true. It's even prettier.
It's even prettier, and there's not nearly as many people.
It's because of the marble buildings. It's just it looks beautiful.
But aside from the aesthetics of that job, I mean, I think I said this when somebody asked me the other day about sort of what I'll miss, and I think it's just the way that people show up to that building and all of the different ways they do, especially the ones who are not elected to be there.
Yeah.
There is so much humanity that flocks to that building every year for so many different reasons. And during the legislative session, obviously everybody's, clamoring for a policy item or an agenda. It is something in the budget. But, there's also those human moments where you see someone taking like wedding photos outside, or you see people rallying and building community in a new way. And just some of the connections that people make with other human beings. Like it's pretty beautiful just to see the range of humanity that comes to this building for 4 months of the year. And
it makes you really proud to be a Washingtonian.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Washington State, and I never want to leave it. I love it here so much.
Jeanie Lindsay, you were KUOW's Olympia reporter. Thank you so much for joining us one more time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
That's it for Sound Politics. Our show was produced by Hans Anderson. Our editors are Gabriel Spitzer and Kat Smith. I'm Scott Greenstone. This show is only possible because of your support, so please consider a donation to keep us going at kuow.org/politics. Robert, thank you so much for your support this week. Robert donated by going to kuow.org/politics. Be like Robert, please. Questions, also. Send us your questions. I was not joking when I said, I was kind of joking, but, the call to action is soundpolitics@kuow.org. Send us your questions, and we'll see you next week.